Hey guys, welcome back to another video. This is Troy with Cichlid Bros. In today's video we are going fish shopping, which was a bit of an unplanned visit and it was definitely an impulse buy. I found some fish that are relatively rare. Very excited to show you what we got. Let's dive right in. So I was in the area and I decided to stop by Aquarium Adventure, where I hadn't been for probably over a year, and it was pleasantly surprising to see the stocking in the aquariums that they had set up, including these two big display tanks. I think each are around 1,500 gallons, but this one here had some really great looking cichlids, some severums, a beautiful female Jack Dempsey right there, a couple blood parrots, a couple threadfin acara, just a group of good looking medium-sized cichlids here. And then across the hall, you'll see this other big display tank which had a couple massive Oscars, a massive flagtail, and I believe those are scats. I'm not super knowledgeable about them, but they kind of acted like silver dollars in this tank, being a group of ditherfish, so it's an interesting combination in this tank. And as you can see there, that flagtail was just incredible, and you can see just how big they get. They get up to 14-15 inches easy, which is pretty surprising, but they have awesome color. This tank also had a little bit of algae on the glass and on the decor, but overall the fish looked really healthy. There's some big tinfoil barbs in the tank. They also looked like they may have rescued or put in some iridescent sharks and a couple big plecos. So just cool to see some really big fish in here, and of course I love the Oscars. And then they have this big planted tank. I believe it's around 250 gallons, and they've had this set up for a while. I've always really liked it, with some angelfish and a planted aquarium. And this is kind of in the center of their plant and coral selection, so it's cool to have this inspiration right where you might be buying the plants. I always stand by this tank for a while and just watch all the different fish, and of course the angelfish, which are amazing in planted aquariums. But then the selection of cichlids is really what surprised me about this visit. They had incredible selection of mbuna, peacock's haps, a lot of Lake Malawi fish. These are some awesome rusty cichlids. I've never seen them with this type of color. Awesome school and activity of the rusty cichlids, but the Lake Tanganyikan fish especially surprised me. These are Juliidochromis, I believe transcriptus. Either these are, or in the next tank they are. I had recently set up a Lake Tanganyikan aquarium with Juliidochromis ornatus, which are pretty similar to these, but if I had known that they had Juliidochromis here and some good looking ones like this, I probably would have just ordered here rather than online. And then they had Cyprichromis, which is another great Tanganyikan fish that could go with my Juliidochromis in the future. The ocellatus here are pretty aggressive little shell dwellers, the aggressive species of shell dweller, but they look great. And then these guys were definitely some rare fish, really caught my eye, and I was watching their really interesting swimming behavior. They're kind of like perching themselves up on the rocks, but that's their natural behavior. They're actually called the striped goby cichlids, erytmodus. There's two different species, and I think this one was from Lake Tanganyikan. Then you had the starry night cichlids, which of course I love, and you'll see them in my tank coming up here in a little bit. And then you had the azul peacocks, which had some really cool color patterns to them. And then of course you had the Oscars, some really good looking young ones. And then next to them was a really small dovii who was camera shy, but cool to see a wolf cichlid in a local fish store regardless. And then next to that were some true green terrors. So a lot of times you'll just see the gold psalm variety in fish stores, but this is either the white psalm or the true green terror, but they were pretty small. And then this tank definitely caught my eye. They were a relatively rare South American cichlid, very similar to the Cupid Cichlid or the Biotodoma cupido, but these were the Biotodoma wavrini, which are a little more rare, I would say, at least in my area. They're very rarely sold online, and they definitely caught my eye. And then of course more of my favorites, the bristlenose pleco. And then they had some interesting Leporina species, not the banded Leporinus, but a different species that were very active. And then they had some good looking flower horns, which also caught my eye. They also have a big saltwater selection, and I love the clown trigger especially, but these are two of the display tanks for saltwater. And then they were bagging up my fish, and trying to guess what I ended up picking out of everything we just saw. At the front of the store, they also had a pond which used to have African cichlids, but now had a mata turtle, a really big one that was on sale, and it was really interesting to see because it was such a big mata mata. But I was really excited to have my fish. It was time to get them home and get them in the tanks. So because this was an impulse buy, I had to figure out which tank I wanted to put them in. Most of my 10 gallons and 20 gallons were occupied by previous fish that are quarantining or just in permanent homes. I considered moving the 2 checkerboard cichlids out of the 20 gallon and moving it to my 40 gallon, but the checkerboard cichlids looked like they were about to pair up and maybe breed, and I did not want to mess with that. The male in there is fired up and colored up more than he's ever been, so really excited for them and didn't want to mess that up. Also, I didn't want to put them in the 40 gallons, which has one cold water aquarium and one that is probably too small for this whole group. And then my 3 10-gallon tanks have the Geophagus spini fry, which need to stay in there. A 10-gallon tank with 3 that are currently quarantining and need to be in there longer. And then my other 10-gallon on my bar, which has the new golden eye cichlid. I could have moved him into the 20-gallon with the 2 females, but I wanted to let him just chill for a little bit longer before I moved him. And also, these 4 new fish might be a little too big for a 10-gallon. They might go after each other. Even though these are known to be pretty peaceful cichlids, a 10-gallon would be a bit tight even for a quarantine. So that left me with a 75-gallon tank here, which has 5 starry night cichlids, 5 of the new Geophagus blue lip cichlids. It has a green phantom pleco and a Cuban cichlid, which is ailing and has swim bladder issues, and I say it every time, it will not affect the other fish. But the rest of the fish in this tank are pretty small, and there's still room in the 75-gallon tank. So even though all these guys are relatively new and the new fish are not going to be quarantined, I am going to continue to watch this tank very closely, and I have medications if needed. So these guys are going to be going in the 75-gallon tank, and I think they will do just fine as a grow out and quarantine with the rest of the fish before I have my final plans of dispersing these amongst the rest of my tanks. And these 4 new fish could go in a variety of setups that I currently have. They could definitely go in the 40-gallon with the Bolivian rams. They could go in the 150-gallon tank with the Geophagus spini and the Big Planet aquarium. They could also go in the 90-gallon aquarium with the angelfish. There is definitely room there. So it's going to be fun figuring out the final plans for them, and I'll be showing the final plans for the Starry Nights and the Blue Lip Geophagus pretty soon as well. So very excited to have these guys, and once we plopped and dropped them into the tank, it was then time to turn off the light, let them settle in, and as always, we would come back in a few hours, maybe even tomorrow, to get a better look at them once they are more established and comfortable in the tank. So about a week after they've been in the tank, we are doing a pretty big water change. Since we have a lot of little guys that want to grow up, we are going to come back here in probably another week and give an update and see how they look. So it's been a couple weeks since we picked up the Biotodoma wavrini, and they've been doing great in this tank, really settled in nicely. They were eating from day one and just seemed very healthy. These guys will definitely get some awesome coloration, some teal blue in their face and in their fins as they grow to their full size, which is only another inch or so. They kind of top out around 4.5 to 5 inches, and they do stay relatively peaceful for a cichlid, which is nice, and they are usually good in a planet aquarium. So I have a lot of options on where these guys can go for their permanent tank, and I can't wait to show what we have in store not only for these guys, but their tank mates, the Geophagus Blue Lips and the Starry Nights. All these things are going to come together very soon, and I can't wait to show the progress and the future plans of this fish room and the display tanks. There's a ton I can't wait to share. But thanks again for watching, guys. We'll see you on the next one.